Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. How far can long-distance love push a person to their limits? When jealousy becomes an obsession, when suspicion turns into hatred, can someone cross every moral boundary? This story takes us to Mumbai, India, where dreams and ambitions intertwine with passion and betrayal. A young woman with dreams of stardom, a perfect but jealous boyfriend, and a powerful executive. Three people whose fates converged in a tragedy no one could have anticipated. Sometimes love isn't just a source of inspiration, it can become the driving force behind the most brutal actions. Emil Jerome was born in Kerala, India, into a traditional middle-class family. From an early age, his parents viewed him as the ideal child. Every Sunday, he attended church with his parents. His academic performance was always top of the class, and he was one of the school's outstanding athletes. In 1997, Emil represented his school in a national swimming competition and won first place. During the same period, he was consistently honored at student debate Olympics. Emil was the embodiment of the term all-rounder, someone who could excel in any field he pursued. As he entered his teenage years, Emil not only possessed talent, but also had a tall, lean build and handsome features. This combination made him the idol of the entire school, especially among the girls. A small story perfectly illustrates Emil's influence and cunning. After an argument with a classmate who was running for class representative, made a clever move. Instead of confronting directly, he quietly campaigned for his rival's opponent. Emil understood the power of his appeal. He knew that if he supported someone, all the girls in school would blindly follow him, and that's exactly what happened. Emil's rival suffered a crushing defeat in the election. This was just one of countless examples showing that Emil not only possessed natural charisma, but was also a skilled strategist who knew how to turn fame into a weapon to achieve everything he wanted. However, despite having an entire army of girls ready to rally around him, Emil's heart belonged to Maria Susraj alone. His love for her was complete and absolute. Their love story began on a platform that older generations will remember with nostalgia. Orkut. For those who lived through the 2000s, Orkut was a popular social network at the time, a true cultural phenomenon before Facebook or Instagram appeared. It's unfortunate that this pioneering platform officially ceased operations in 2014, leaving many with beautiful memories of the early days of social media. Fate brought Emil and Maria together, right in their high school classrooms. Both joined an Orkut group for their school students, and from there, love quietly blossomed. If Emil was the model of a well-rounded student, then Maria was a true artistic soul. From childhood, she displayed remarkable talent in music and dance. For Maria, the dream of becoming an actress wasn't just a desire, it was her reason for existing. Maria's school life was completely opposite to Emil's. Instead of diligently studying from books, she devoted all her passion to school plays, arts programs, and every artistic activity the school offered. The inevitable result was a dismal report card with a series of subjects requiring retakes, but Maria didn't care. In her mind, the artistic path was her destiny, and she didn't need any other backup plan, including attending college. For Maria, her passion for the arts wasn't a choice, it was a mission. However, Maria's dream faced fierce opposition from her family. In their traditional view, a woman's duty was to marry, have children, and be content with the role of wife and mother, not chase after unrealistic dreams of Bollywood stardom. But Maria, with her strong and determined nature, chose to listen to her heart's calling, rather than her family's voice. The year 2002 marked an important milestone in Maria's career when she was chosen for the lead role in a film. In her eyes, this was the golden door to success, the grand debut she had long dreamed of. However, reality was more brutal than expected. The film completely failed at the box office, crushing her initial hopes. After this failure, Maria still tried to hold on to her career with small, scattered roles, but opportunities were increasingly scarce. What made this situation more difficult was Maria's grand ambition. She wasn't satisfied with being just an ordinary local actress. In her mind, only national fame would be worthy of her talent and hopes. Determined not to surrender to failure, Maria made a bold decision, moved to Mumbai, the heart of India's film industry, where Bollywood dreams could become reality. Meanwhile, Emil was writing his own success story on a completely different path. He had earned admission to university to study marine engineering in another city, and later became a naval lieutenant. Subsequently, continued to shine in every field he entered. His superiors couldn't stop praising his talent. For Emil, excellence seemed to be a birthright. Interestingly, during this time, the couple's relationship was kept strictly secret. Even Emil's closest friends had no idea how serious the romance between him and Maria had become. When asked, Emil would casually brush it off. "Oh, we're just dating." However, according to press reports, the reality was that both were preparing to enter the engagement phase and had even planned their wedding. Emil loved Maria and knew that to be with her, he would have to let her move to Mumbai. Maria wasn't a woman who would trade her dreams for family happiness. She was born to shine on stage, not to settle within four walls. Emil understood this, and with a heavy heart, he agreed to let the love of his life fly to Mumbai. They began a challenging long-distance relationship, holding on to the fragile hope that someday, fate would bring them back together. But destiny had other plans, and that name was Neeraj Grover. Neeraj Grover, a name making waves in the Indian television industry. At 25, he had achieved what many people spent their entire lives trying to accomplish. His most recent success was a game show called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader?, a program that made everyone curious to test themselves. Neeraj was the embodiment of success and power in the entertainment industry. March 2008 marked an important turning point in Maria's life when she met Neeraj Grover. In Mumbai's entertainment world, it was common for people in the same industry to meet at events, parties, or familiar venues. Their first meeting occurred naturally. Initially, their relationship was entirely work-related. Neeraj, as a reputable producer, agreed to help Maria find acting opportunities. He spent time listening to her read scripts, organized private auditions, and seriously evaluated her abilities. However, the results weren't what Maria expected. Neeraj realized that her acting talent might not be as outstanding as she believed, especially when Maria's regional accent became a barrier in approaching major roles. Nevertheless, with professional spirit, he still tried to arrange some casting opportunities for her. What was surprising was that during their work together, the two gradually became closer than ever before. Their meetings were no longer limited to work, but expanded to personal conversations, intimate meals, and gradually, the boundary between professional and personal relationships began to blur. Despite being far away, Maria maintained regular contact with Emil through daily phone calls. Whenever Emil asked about Neeraj, she would answer lightly and confidently, "He's just helping me with auditions. Maybe Neeraj has some feelings for me, but I don't feel anything, don't worry." But these reassurances couldn't calm the storm of jealousy rising in Emil's heart. Emil wasn't a naive man. He understood clearly that Maria possessed an enchanting beauty that would make any man turn to look, and Neeraj, a powerful producer, holding the key to the success Maria craved. This made Emil feel extremely uneasy. Was Neeraj taking advantage of his position to approach Maria? Was she being swept up by promises of a brilliant future? And Emil's worries weren't unfounded. While the relationship between him and Maria gradually grew cold through distant phone calls, the relationship between Maria and Neeraj grew increasingly intimate. Everything reached its peak when Maria decided to move into Neeraj's apartment temporarily, until she found a new place. They weren't just colleagues, not just friends, they had even lived together for a time. Not long after, Maria was officially introduced to friends as Neeraj's girlfriend. According to a close friend we'll call Lau, this couple didn't hide their feelings at all. They appeared at parties as real lovers, exchanging passionate kisses in front of everyone without any embarrassment. Lau also recounted a rather ironic situation. One day Maria came to him looking worried, asking seriously, "Do you think Neeraj is betraying me? Is he conducting casting couch sessions with other women?" This question was deeply ironic when Maria herself was living a double life, betraying the man she was engaged to back home. May 6th marked a fateful turning point. Neeraj had announced to all his friends that he would spend the entire day helping Maria move to her new apartment. She had finally found her own place and was ready to start a new chapter. This seemingly normal announcement became Neeraj's final farewell to the world. The next morning, when the sun was high and Neeraj still hadn't appeared at the office, his friend Lau began to feel uneasy. Neeraj was famous for being extremely punctual and responsible. His being late without notice was completely abnormal. Lau decided to call to check the situation. The call was answered, but the voice from the other end wasn't Neeraj's, it was Maria's. She explained calmly, "Neeraj went home around 1:30 a.m. after helping me finish moving. But he forgot his phone here. That's why I'm answering for him. The explanation seemed reasonable, but as time passed and Neeraj still didn't appear, people began to worry seriously. His phone became the center of attention as it continuously rang. Friends, colleagues, business partners, everyone was trying to contact the busy Neeraj Grover as usual. The statistics from that day showed a total of 130 calls made to Neeraj's phone, and among them, only one call was answered by someone. Among the continuous incoming calls, Neeraj's sister was perhaps the most worried. She spent the entire afternoon anxiously calling repeatedly, hoping to hear her brother's familiar voice. Finally, after countless attempts, the call was answered. "Neeraj? Neeraj?" She called her brother's name with a voice full of worry, but only silence answered. Instead of his voice, what she heard was only strange sounds, vague rustling, as if the phone was being crushed in a bag of clothes. Then suddenly the signal was cut off. When the situation became increasingly serious, Lau couldn't sit still anymore. He decided to go directly to Maria to retrieve Neeraj's phone and gather more information. However, instead of inviting him up to the apartment naturally as usual, Maria did something quite unusual. She came down to the building lobby to meet him. When Maria appeared, something was wrong. Her body was full of strange marks, signs that Lau, in his worried state about Neeraj, didn't notice. Her behavior was also somewhat different from usual. Her gestures, eyes, and way of speaking all carried an indescribable unease. Lau's simple question, "Do you know where Neeraj went after leaving your place?" unexpectedly made Maria flustered. Those moments of hesitation, though brief, were enough for Lau to realize something was wrong. "I don't know where he went," Maria finally answered with a lack of confidence. Lau felt everything had exceeded the limits of normal worry. "All right, give me the phone," he said decisively. "I'll have to file a missing person report immediately. Neeraj has been missing for over 24 hours, and this is completely unlike him." With a heavy heart, Lau drove straight to the police station. The missing person report immediately triggered an official investigation. And as a natural rule in every case, police started with the last person to see the victim, Maria Sutt. She became the focus of the investigation not only as the last witness, but also because strange details began to be revealed. When investigators dug deeper into the relationship between Maria and Neeraj, a complex picture gradually emerged. What was initially thought to be collegial friendship or professional support now seemed to be much more emotionally intimate. Friends' testimonies, evidence of them living together, and the couple's public intimacy all pointed in one direction. This was a real romantic relationship, but what made the situation complex was that Maria had another man, Emil, her fiancé, who was far away. This discovery was like a blinding flash in the investigators' minds. They might be dealing with a crime of passion, where desire and jealousy had led to unforeseeable consequences. As the investigation expanded, another dark aspect of Emil began to be revealed. Those who had known him described a picture completely opposite to the image of the perfect young man. Although Emil excelled in studies, sports, and was admired by everyone, he had a weakness, a hot temper, and fierce jealousy. Especially when mentioning Neeraj, Emil couldn't hide his unease and hostility. The combination of superior talent and jealous nature was like a time bomb waiting to explode. Maria frequently had to come to the police station to face continuous interrogations. In each meeting, she steadfastly maintained her innocent stance and repeated the story she had told Lau like a memorized lesson. Neeraj came to help her move. He stayed until 1:30 a.m., then left and accidentally forgot his phone. However, experienced investigators quickly caught the inconsistency in this testimony. They asked a seemingly simple but difficult-to-answer question. Why would a busy man like Neeraj not return to get his phone? In an era when mobile phones became an indispensable right hand, forgetting it somewhere and not immediately returning to get it was almost impossible. As pressure increased through each interrogation session, small cracks in Maria's story began to appear. Police psychologists noticed every small detail. How she avoided eye contact when answering, unusual moments of hesitation, and especially increasingly vague and uncertain responses. With each interrogation, Maria appeared more tense, as if a heavy secret was weighing down her soul. What caught investigators' attention wasn't just the testimony, but also Maria's physical condition. Her body had strange wounds scattered throughout, especially clear bite marks on her arms and chest, along with deep cuts on her wrists. When questioned about the origin of these wounds, Maria gave strangely separate explanations. She claimed the cuts on her wrists were simply kitchen accidents and those terrible bite marks. Maria calmly declared they were traces of A with Emil. The fiancé had suddenly appeared in Mumbai at exactly this time. This coincidence was too perfect to be random. Emil, when brought in for questioning, also had his own story. He insisted his presence in Mumbai was to attend a special naval training course. However, what was suspicious was that police apparently didn't bother to verify this information with military authorities. A serious oversight in the investigation process. And then, when digging deeper into the couple's activities, police discovered a shocking detail. Phone records showed Emil and Maria had contacted each other over 1,000 times in just 2 weeks from May 7th to 20th, exactly the period after Neeraj disappeared. This number was equivalent to 77 calls per day, a frantic frequency that even the most passionately in-love couples would find hard to maintain. The question arose, what did they need to discuss so urgently? When police searched Maria's apartment, they encountered a scene full of contradictions. According to her testimony, Neeraj had come here to help her move, but the apartment was as empty as if no one had actually moved in. Instead of cardboard boxes and items scattered messily, usually seen on moving day, this place seemed too neat, too clean. Most notable was the strong smell of fresh paint permeating the entire space. This smell was too strong to be from ordinary painting work, and too recent to match the time Maria was said to have moved in. The walls appeared to have been refreshed hastily, a detail that made investigators suspicious. However, the crucial clue came from GPS location technology. The only call answered on Neeraj's phone. The call where his sister only heard rustling sounds had inadvertently left an undeniable digital trace. Maria had insisted to police that on May 7th, she and Anil had gone shopping in another area of Mumbai, but when experts traced the GPS signal of the answered call, they discovered a shocking truth. Neeraj's phone at that time wasn't in Mumbai at all, but in a completely different location, even a different city. This meant someone had taken Neeraj's phone and traveled far from Mumbai, and if Maria was holding this phone as she admitted, then her testimony about staying in the city was completely false. This strange coincidence, born from an accidentally answered call, had become irrefutable evidence of Maria's deception. When evidence against Anil and Maria continued to pile up, the pressure from continuous interrogations exceeded the limits Maria could endure. The police building became her mental prison. Finally, under unbearable pressure, Maria collapsed. The confession began with a fateful phone call on May 6th. Anil from far away had called Maria as usual, but this time he heard something that made him furious. The voice of a man from the other end. No need to guess, it was Neeraj. In that moment, all the doubts, worries, and jealousy that had been building up in Anil's heart for months exploded like a volcano. What made Anil even more enraged was that he had never known Maria had been living with Neeraj, even temporarily. This concealment was like a knife stabbing straight into his trust. Maria, sensing Anil's fury through the phone, had tried to calmly explain, Neeraj is just helping me move. He'll go home right after dinner. Definitely won't stay overnight here. But in reality, Neeraj had stayed overnight. And this was the seed for the coming tragedy. Early morning on May 7th, Maria was awakened by violent door banging and continuous doorbell ringing. Who could appear at such an early hour? With a worried mood, she dragged herself to the door. The moment Maria opened the door, time seemed to stop. Before her was Anil, but not the Anil she had known. This was a completely different person, with eyes burning with hatred and a face distorted by anger. The demon of jealousy had completely taken over his soul. Without a word, Anil pushed Maria aside with hateful force and rushed straight into the bedroom. The scene he saw was exactly what had ignited the final flame of fury. Neeraj was lying on the bed. Rage exploded instantly. Anil lunged at Neeraj with consecutive punches. Maria's desperate screams echoed throughout the apartment. She begged. She cried for help, but no one could stop this storm of fury. Neeraj, in desperation, ran into the bathroom and tried to lock the door. But Anil, with the strength of a madman, had broken through that final barrier, and when he appeared with a kitchen knife in his hand, Neeraj's fate was sealed. What happened next was so horrific that words cannot fully describe it. Anil had turned Neeraj into the victim of a brutal massacre, blood splattering everywhere, turning the bathroom into the scene of a nightmare. According to Maria, the savagery was to the extent that she could see Neeraj's internal organs, a haunting image she would never forget. But the horror didn't stop there, according to Maria's confession. Right next to Neeraj's still warm corpse, Anil had made her the next victim, not of death, but of a savage sexual assault. This was the source of the wounds police had discovered on her body. After the madness temporarily subsided, harsh reality struck. They needed to cover up the crime. Around 10 a.m., Maria went out to buy 2 large bags, curtains, and a knife. These seemingly harmless items would become tools for them to dismember Neeraj into small pieces for easy transport. The cleanup work was conducted systematically but hastily. They tried to erase every trace, but blood had seeped deep into the walls, forcing them to paint over it. This was the reason for the strong, fresh paint smell police had discovered. Even in their panic, they had chosen the wrong paint color, creating suspicious differences on the wall. Finally, they borrowed a car from an acquaintance, loaded the bags containing the body into the car, and began the journey to Neeraj Grover's final resting place, a journey they hoped would bury this horrific secret forever. While on the way to the body disposal site, a small mistake became the decisive link in the chain of evidence against them. Maria had accidentally answered one of the 130 continuous calls to Neeraj's phone. Although the call lasted only a few short seconds, and she didn't say a word, this was enough for the GPS system to record the phone's exact location. This seemingly minor mistake became irrefutable evidence, exposing the lies in Maria's alibi testimony. At 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, the couple stopped at a gas station and bought 2 full cans of gasoline. They drove to a deserted forest area in Manor, about 25 miles from Mumbai, poured gasoline on the bags containing the body, and completely incinerated them. By 9:40 p.m., they had returned to Mumbai, thinking they had erased all traces. When the case was brought to court, the trial results caused fierce controversy and public opinion. Maria Cicero was acquitted of murder, but found guilty of concealing and destroying evidence, with a sentence of 3 years in prison. However, what outraged the entire Indian population was that she didn't have to serve a single day in prison. Due to a strange loophole in the judicial system, the 3-year waiting period for trial was counted toward her sentence time. Therefore, Maria was released immediately after sentencing, a mockery of justice that left the victim and Neeraj's family feeling disappointed. As for Emil, he received a 10-year sentence for culpable homicide. The court determined that he had acted in a fit of rage, without premeditation, so he wasn't convicted of premeditated murder. But this decision created 2 strong streams of opinion in public discourse. Public reaction reflected deep dissatisfaction with the judicial system. While some believed the sentence was appropriate to the nature of the crime, most public opinion felt the punishment was too lenient compared to the brutality of the case. The image of a savage murder, dismemberment, and incineration of the body was deeply etched in people's minds, making them believe that justice had not truly been served. The case highlighted the complex intersection of love, ambition, jealousy, and violence. It showed how passion could drive people to cross moral boundaries they never thought possible. The tragic end of Neeraj Grover, a young man with a promising career, serves as a stark reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed when love turns to obsession and jealousy becomes murderous rage. This Mumbai murder case remains one of India's most notorious crimes of passion, a cautionary tale about the dark side of human emotions and the devastating consequences when love transforms into something monstrous. Story 2. A woman suddenly vanished shortly after returning home from a brief trip. When her family came to check on her, they found the house in disarray. Strangely, her only son, who was the only person present at the scene, kept changing his story. Could her disappearance, right inside her own home, have something to do with him? What made the situation even more peculiar was the location. El Paso, a city in far west Texas, right on the border with Mexico. Known for its vibrant cultural blend, tense border atmosphere, and high crime rate, El Paso is a place where many families, despite hardship, have remained rooted across generations. They hold tightly to tradition, loyalty, and weekend gatherings rich in community spirit. It was in this very environment that Gloria Marmolejo was born on July 28, 1954. She grew up in a large Mexican-American family, where members deeply cared for and supported one another. Daily life revolved around close-knit interactions, shared meals, and constant conversations. As a young woman, Gloria met Bene Marmolejo, a man who swept her off her feet from the very first meeting. After several years of dating, the two married on October 11, 1975. Gloria entered the marriage with full devotion and unwavering trust. She always stood by her husband, never letting anyone speak ill of him, no matter the situation. Their married life soon entered a new chapter with the arrival of their children. Manny came first, and a few years later, David was born, filling the house with even more laughter and joy. The presence of the two boys brought fresh energy to the family, and during those years, their life felt almost perfect. However, things began to shift after David's birth. Benet took on a new job, which he claimed required frequent travel. At first he was gone for just a few days at a time, but his absences gradually became longer and more frequent, until eventually he was practically gone. No one knew where he went or what he was doing. His trips were wrapped in silence, and even close family received no explanations. These prolonged absences began to leave a visible mark by the time David was around 6 years old. Benet had virtually disappeared. Within a few months, his absence became the norm, and no one expected him to return. When nothing changed, Gloria officially filed for divorce in April 1995. Benet left the state and completely cut off contact with both Manny and David. Confronting this new reality, Gloria refused to let Benet's departure break her spirit. Rather than dwell on the pain, she embraced the circumstances and dedicated herself to raising her two sons. According to her brother, she made every effort to build an individual bond with each child, adapting to their unique personalities and needs. Over time, the distance between Manny and David became increasingly noticeable. The two brothers gradually pursued very different lifestyles and no longer had much in common. Manny settled down early. He landed a dream job and maintained a steady, structured life. David, on the other hand, was constantly changing his interests, his ambitions, even his entire direction in life. Nothing seemed to stick for long. Amid all these changes, Gloria began to face the reality of living alone after years of devoting herself entirely to her family. But rather than let loneliness take over, she chose to change her life. At the age of 50, she retired after 27 years of service and returned to school to finally complete the management degree she had once put on hold. That turning point led her to a new career in real estate, where she became a licensed agent, buying and selling properties. The job not only brought an income, but also gave her a renewed sense of purpose. It offered her flexible hours and the ability to control her own schedule, something she had never truly experienced before. Thanks to this new chapter, Gloria's life gradually found stability. Her home was always tidy and well kept, surrounded by a lush, vibrant garden she personally nurtured and adored. Each day passed peacefully, filled with reading, fresh air, and the quiet serenity she had spent years trying to find. But then, without warning, that peace began to crack. One of Gloria's longtime neighbors, an elderly man she had known for years, fell seriously ill. His adult son, who had never appeared in any legal or neighborhood records, returned to care for his father. From that point on, Gloria started noticing strange things happening. She often saw someone watching her from behind the thick bushes along the fence that separated their yards. The man would hide, never coming too close, but his stare made her feel deeply uneasy. Not long after those sightings began, Gloria noticed him holding what looked like a phone or camera, its lens pointed directly at her. Even more troubling, this wasn't a one-time event. It happened repeatedly, and from that moment on, Gloria's sense of safety inside her own home began to unravel. As the unsettling signs grew more frequent, she tried to remain calm, though her anxiety steadily increased. Still, Gloria never called the police. Part of it came from compassion. She didn't want to cause more stress for her ailing neighbor. She feared that involving law enforcement might only escalate the situation. Another part of her believed the best course of action was to stay quiet, stay alert, and avoid doing anything rash. Unsure of how best to proceed, she chose to call her brother Mark instead of the authorities. In a composed voice, Gloria recounted everything that had happened, admitted how worried she truly was, and asked him to check in on her regularly, just in case things took a turn for the worse. Though she didn't want to make a big deal out of it, she still believed her family deserved to be informed. After that phone call, the idea of moving away started to take clearer shape in Gloria's mind, especially since both of her sons had long since established lives elsewhere. Manny was living in Phoenix, while David remained relatively close by. The city of El Paso, which had once given her a daily sense of peace, now felt increasingly unsettling. To understand how things got to this point, you'd have to rewind to when David, the youngest of Gloria's two sons, began entering adulthood. That was the point when he slowly became the center of everything that unfolded afterward. Even as a child, David had stood out, not because he was exceptionally bright or well-behaved, but because he was headstrong and constantly defiant. He frequently ignored important routines, neglected schoolwork, dodged household chores, and argued with adults whenever they tried to guide him. This behavior became even more apparent when compared to his older brother, Manny, a calm, athletic, and ambitious young man. While Manny followed rules and stayed focused, David chose a more reckless path. He disregarded school discipline, spent more time chasing girls than studying, and developed a pattern of doing things only when they suited his mood. One week, he'd be obsessed with learning to play an instrument, and a few weeks later, he'd abandon it altogether. Even when Gloria asked for help around the house, he'd find excuses to stop midway. Rather than investing in his education or thinking seriously about his future, David focused on his looks and finding ways to impress his classmates. What truly mattered to him was appearance, popularity, and being admired by girls. Family members recalled that even in middle school, he craved being the center of attention. He knew how to use his good looks, confidence, and natural charm to draw people in. That's why, while his peers were still figuring out the basics of dating, David acted like he had it all mastered. He saw himself as someone who naturally stood out, and he believed it was only right that girls would pay attention to him. This sense of self-importance gradually became a deeply ingrained part of his personality. So when David started dating Laura Marmolejo at age 16, he brought that same attitude into the relationship. To outsiders, Laura seemed like his official girlfriend, but in reality, David was secretly seeing other girls behind her back. Around family and friends, he introduced Laura as the girl he was committed to. Yet privately, he continued juggling multiple relationships. What seemed like a typical teenage romance took an unexpected turn when Laura, then a ninth grader and 2 years younger than David, found out she was pregnant. That news forced both of them to face responsibility and rethink their lives. David said he needed to grow up and take care of his family, so he dropped out of school, started working, and soon after proposed to Laura. That decision shocked everyone, Gloria included. Even though she was fully aware of the truth, she chose to stand by David and refused to turn her back on him during such a difficult time. Not only that, she welcomed Laura into the family, and took it upon herself to help care for the baby. The more involved Gloria became in the lives of her children and grandchildren, the more indispensable she became to the household. After the couple's first child was born, they went on to have 3 more. Living under the same roof, Gloria handled the daily routines, offered financial support, and stood by them through every stage of the kids' development. It was as if she were reliving her days as a young mother, only this time as a grandmother, pouring all her love into nurturing the next generation. But while Gloria brought stability, David continued to struggle with finding direction in life. He bounced from job to job, working in all kinds of fields, but never sticking around for long. Each time he started something new, he would quit soon after, and rarely showed any drive to move forward in his career. Then an unexpected opportunity came his way. He was offered a position at a construction company in Phoenix, Arizona, with better pay and the chance to reconnect with his brother Manny, who had been living there for years. Not long after, their father Benny also got back in touch after being absent for many years, and he too was now living in Phoenix. Seeing a stable job and family nearby, David decided to move there with his wife and kids. Relocating to Phoenix wasn't just a change of address. For David, it was a chance to earn more money, mend his relationship with Manny after years of silence, and reunite with Ben, the father he hadn't seen in years, and once thought he'd never reconnect with. However, life in Arizona didn't turn out quite the way David had imagined. Ben was now living with a woman and raising 2 younger children, Jonathan and Mariah Wilson. At the time, Mariah was only 11 years old, making her 17 years younger than David. Despite the large age gap, Mariah quickly bonded with her new older siblings, especially David. To her, he seemed mature and confident, a role model she looked up to. She often visited their home, played with the boys, and helped out around the house. With Laura busy taking care of 4 kids, she appreciated the extra hands. As time went on, the closeness between Mariah and David became more apparent. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but during this period, subtle signs began to raise concern. Mariah started showing up more and more in David's daily life. Soon Mariah, David's half-sister through their father, became a nearly constant presence in his world. To those around them, there was nothing particularly suspicious about it. Their bond was reflected in shared outings, family gatherings, and moments that seemed intimate and familiar, yet didn't raise any red flags. As Mariah gradually entered adulthood, the closeness between her and David began to make Laura feel uneasy. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but deep inside, she grew increasingly suspicious. From the way they talked to each other, to the subtle touches they exchanged, it all appeared to cross the line of an ordinary sibling relationship. While she couldn't be sure of anything, Laura couldn't shake off the growing sense of doubt building inside her day by day. Despite her unease, Laura tried to remain rational. At that time, Mariah had just reached adulthood, and Laura wondered if her worries were simply the result of work-related stress and accumulated exhaustion while she was still weighing everything. David unexpectedly received a job offer in Hawaii, and without hesitation, decided to go alone. There, he met a woman named Adrian. Their relationship developed quickly, and not long after, Adrian told him she was pregnant. As soon as the news reached the family, Gloria was devastated. David hadn't even officially ended things with Laura, yet he had already rushed to start a new life with another woman. Gloria still believed her son would come back to reunite with Laura and raise the kids together, but her advice and pleas fell on deaf ears. Disappointed by David's attitude, Gloria turned to other relatives for support. Most of them began to distance themselves, except Mariah, whose actions stood out. She continued to stay in touch with David regularly, despite the long distance. Their bond didn't fade. In fact, it only grew stronger over time because of that closeness. No one thought it was strange when David invited Mariah to spend the summer in Hawaii when she was 15. Everyone assumed it was just a typical family visit. After all, she would be staying with her older brother, the woman he was living with, and their newborn baby. But within just a few weeks, things began to feel off. Adrian gradually picked up on subtle signs, things that would seem innocent to others. The way they looked at each other, the way they whispered, were their playful moments together. At first, it was only a fleeting unease, but soon, a distinct suspicion began to take shape. That suspicion was finally confirmed one afternoon, when Adrian walked in on them in the bedroom. Stunned and horrified, she immediately called Gloria to tell her everything. Upon hearing the news, Gloria nearly collapsed. She couldn't believe that her own son could be involved in an inappropriate relationship with his underage stepdaughter. In a state of shock, she could only say one thing, that whatever was going on had to stop immediately. Less than 24 hours later, Mariah was sent back home to Texas. Fortunately, the incident was never reported to authorities, so no legal consequences followed. But from that moment on, Gloria no longer saw David as a son she could ever trust again. Things grew even more tense when Adrian decided to tell Gloria the entire truth. What followed was a serious confrontation between mother and son. Gloria didn't sugarcoat it. She immediately condemned David's actions, demanded he cut off all contact with his half-sister Mariah, and made it clear she would not tolerate anything like this ever again. But instead of showing remorse, David pushed back. He insisted that nothing inappropriate had happened with Mariah, and accused Adrian of overreacting. Gloria didn't believe him. With her experience and clarity of judgment, she could sense that David was hiding something. What she had seen, and what she'd been told, made her believe the situation was far more serious than he let on. Just as the family was still reeling from that confrontation, another devastating event hit them. Only a few days after Mariah returned to Texas, David was involved in a serious motorcycle accident on a winding mountain road. He lost control, was thrown from the bike, and sustained severe injuries. The crash left him so badly hurt that doctors had no choice but to amputate one of his legs. The moment Gloria received the news, she didn't hesitate. Despite the rift between them, she immediately flew to Hawaii. The only thing on her mind was that her son was lying in a hospital bed, alone, in pain and vulnerable. When she arrived and saw David lying motionless, covered in bandages and surrounded by medical equipment, she rushed to embrace him, almost as if all the anger and heartbreak had vanished in an instant. That emotional reunion, born in the middle of tragedy, marked a turning point in their relationship. Throughout David's recovery, Gloria stayed by his side, helping him adjust to his new physical limitations. From learning to move again, to eating, to daily rehab sessions in the hospital. Later on, David would often talk about that period with emotion he couldn't quite hide. In conversations with others, he'd say that his mother held his hand every day, encouraged him constantly, and did whatever it took to remind him that he was still himself, even if his body wasn't whole anymore. As his health began to stabilize, Gloria made a proposal that caught David off guard. She wanted him to come back home to El Paso with her. He agreed almost immediately. There was nothing left for him in Hawaii. His relationship with Adrian had ended, and his children had long stopped calling or checking in. At that point, returning to live with his mother was the only real option he had. Before they packed their bags and left Hawaii, Gloria laid out one firm condition. David had to cut off all communication with Mariah permanently. In exchange, she promised to keep everything quiet and give him a chance to start over. David didn't hesitate. He agreed, and together they returned to Texas. Back in El Paso, Gloria resumed her daily routines and focused on helping her son adjust to his new life. Still, she kept a close eye on him, monitoring every phone call and every move he made, worried that if she let her guard down, everything could spiral out of control again. After they settled into their new home, David seemed calm. He helped around the house and showed no signs of unusual behavior. As for Gloria, who had weathered so many storms in the past, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally in control. Still, not all of Gloria's uneasiness disappeared. The neighbor who used to watch her from behind the bushes still lived next door, and his presence continued to make her uncomfortable. But now that David was back home, she felt somewhat safer, even if there was still emotional distance between them. Just having a man in the house gave her more peace of mind when she was alone. With things at home seemingly under control, Gloria began thinking about taking a short trip. Her oldest son Manny, who now lived in Phoenix, had been inviting her to visit for months. Now that David's health had stabilized, she finally decided to accept. Before leaving, Gloria gave David clear instructions on how to manage the house and follow her guidelines while she was away. David stayed in El Paso, handling chores and behaving as though he was following every direction she'd given him. Yet, while she was in Arizona, Gloria couldn't shake a strange feeling. She didn't know exactly why, but something fell off. Eventually, she called her brother, Mark, and asked him to stop by David's house just to make sure everything was okay and that Mariah wasn't there. Mark agreed, but the way he reported back didn't reassure Gloria at all. She had the sense that he had only glanced around the yard from outside, made a quick phone call, and didn't really look into anything. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. Finally, unable to ignore her instincts, Gloria booked the earliest flight back to El Paso without telling anyone. The moment she walked through the door, she knew something was wrong. The house, which she always kept neat and clean, was now a mess, dirty, cluttered and disorganized, with items strewn everywhere. What caught her attention most was her own bedroom door. It had been locked shut from the outside, secured with a brand new padlock that looked nothing like any of the locks they had ever used in the house. Her first reaction was to call David immediately and demand an explanation. He told her he was at the movie theater and would be home soon. When he returned, the atmosphere became instantly tense. Gloria was furious. She scolded him for breaking his promise, letting the house fall apart, and ignoring everything she had asked him to do like none of it mattered. David tried to defend himself, saying he was only in the middle of helping her pack for a return trip to Phoenix. A few hours after that argument, on the evening of July 25th, Manny grew concerned when he couldn't reach his mother. She had left his house that morning, but since then there had been no calls, no texts, nothing. He tried calling and messaging her repeatedly, but there was no response. Sensing something wasn't right, Manny reached out to David. At first, David didn't answer, but close to midnight, he finally called back and said Gloria had returned home. They had a disagreement, and he had helped her pack. He assumed she had gone back to Phoenix, but by the next morning, July 26th, there was still no word from Gloria. Manny called David again, pressing for more information, but this time, David's voice was cold and detached. He simply repeated that he didn't know where their mother was, or where she might have gone. His vague, dismissive tone only fueled Manny's growing fear. Something was very, very wrong. The situation grew more alarming by July 27th. Gloria had now been missing for 2 days. Manny reached out to everyone he could think of, family, friends, and neighbors, but no one had seen her. Finally, he decided to call the police. However, officers explained that the missing person report had to be filed by the last person to see Gloria alive, and that person was David. At that point, Gloria's mother and her brother Mark arrived at the house. David answered the door with a calm face, but clearly showed signs of irritation. After repeated explanations and urging, he eventually agreed to go with them to the police station to file the missing person report. In the early hours of July 28th, Gloria's 55th birthday, Manny and his wife decided to travel to El Paso to see her. The moment they walked into the house, something fell off. The curtains were still closed, and the air inside was stuffy and eerily still. What they saw only deepened their concern. Gloria's suitcase was still sitting in the corner, untouched. Her makeup bag hadn't been opened. These small details made it clear she had never left. Her sudden disappearance, without a note or message, directly contradicted David's claim that he had helped her pack. All of her personal belongings were still in place, yet David showed no sign of worry or urgency. As unease continued to mount, Manny began pressing David for a more detailed account of the last time he saw their mother. David showed him a few text messages on his phone, in which Gloria had supposedly asked him to unlock the front door for her. Then out of nowhere, David added a new detail to his story. He said that, after leaving the house that night, he went to a party at the home of a woman named Catherine Thompson. Later that same evening, he claimed he went to a nightclub with another woman and stayed out until around 3 a.m. Right after recounting his whereabouts that night, David suddenly made a disturbing comment while speaking with his brother about their mother's disappearance. He said he was worried the police might find his DNA on her body because he had previously hugged and kissed her. On July 29th, local investigators brought in the entire family for formal questioning. David stuck to the same general story, but this time he changed a few key details. He no longer claimed he'd gone to the movies. Instead, he insisted he had spent the whole evening at Catherine's party. To verify his account, police reached out to Catherine. She confirmed that David had attended the party, but said he only showed up around 7 or 8 p.m. and stayed until close to midnight. According to her, he appeared uncomfortable, checked his phone repeatedly, and didn't engage much in conversation. She made no mention of him leaving to go to a nightclub or being with any other woman that night. At the same time, the interrogations were underway. Another significant development emerged. Gloria's car was discovered abandoned near an elementary school in El Paso. Inside, her purse, keys, and phone were all intact. However, there was no sign of Gloria herself at the scene. This discovery escalated the case beyond a typical missing person report, forcing police to begin treating it as a potential criminal investigation. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors, and collecting witness statements from local residents. Several neighbors recalled seeing Gloria's vehicle leave the garage on the morning of July 26th, the last day she was reportedly seen. One witness, named Julian, was confident she had seen Gloria behind the wheel. However, another neighbor, Rafael Vargas, gave a completely different account. He stated he had seen a young woman with light skin and short blonde hair driving the car. More notably, he also spotted a shadowy figure in the back seat, possibly a man. This was the first clear indication that someone else might have been using Gloria's vehicle after she disappeared. Based on this testimony, police widened the scope of the investigation and conducted a full search of the home. Inside the garage, they discovered several blood stains, most prominently concentrated around the door of a built-in storage cabinet. It was at that moment the house was officially declared a crime scene. When questioned again, David became increasingly inconsistent, first claiming he left the house in the morning, then saying it was in the afternoon, even adding new details that he hadn't mentioned before. Despite the pressure, he remained strangely calm, never once asking about the investigation or showing concern. Meanwhile, investigators sent the blood samples for forensic testing and began collecting DNA from family members. Watching David closely, Manny started to notice something unusual about Mariah. She was constantly by David's side, composed, but never leaving him for a moment, which struck Manny as suspicious. He immediately urged the police to look into her potential involvement, especially remembering what Adrian had previously told him. In addition, detectives began analyzing cell phone data and quickly uncovered a series of alarming patterns. Records showed that between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. on July 26th, David's phone made a call. At the time, location data placed him less than 4 miles from the area where Gloria's body would later be discovered. Furthermore, between 5:30 and 6 a.m. that same morning, there was a flurry of calls exchanged between David's and Mariah's phones. Taken together, these findings shifted the trajectory of the investigation. The inconsistencies in witness statements, the forensic evidence, and the digital trail painted a picture vastly different from the one David had originally presented. Gloria's disappearance was no longer being treated as an accident or voluntary departure. It was now considered a criminal case, one that placed focus on the two individuals most closely connected, David and Mariah. On July 31st, the investigation reached a major turning point when a woman walking her dog discovered Gloria's decomposing body. in a remote area near the Santa Teresa Desert. The victim's head had been wrapped in two layers, an inner layer of plastic tarp and an outer layer of paper bag. Her left leg and one arm were tightly bound with a long rope. The way the body had been handled made it clear to investigators that the killer had deliberately tried to avoid leaving behind any biological evidence. The autopsy results later confirmed the cause of death. Gloria had died from asphyxiation with a fractured larynx, clear evidence that the attacker used significant force and maintained full control over the victim during the act. This reinforced the conclusion that the killing was not impulsive, but a calculated and deliberate act of violence. Further forensic analysis at the crime scene revealed more critical evidence. Blood found in Gloria's garage was confirmed to belong to Mariah, immediately making her a primary focus of the investigation. Meanwhile, Gloria's brother Mark told police that just before her disappearance, Gloria had expressed strong concerns about David and Mariah's inappropriate relationship, and she had completely opposed it. With this information, investigators brought both Mariah and David in for questioning. The two claimed they had been together all night from July 25th into the early morning hours of July 26th. However, cell phone data contradicted their story. At around 1 a.m., David's phone pinged a cell tower less than 4 miles from where Gloria's body was eventually found. Furthermore, between 5:30 and 6 a.m., there were multiple calls exchanged between David and Mariah. Investigators immediately questioned if they were together the entire time. Why were they calling each other? At this point, the mounting pressure began to shake Mariah. When offered a deal, prosecutorial immunity in exchange for full cooperation, she didn't hesitate to accept. Mariah confessed that Gloria had unexpectedly come home and found her there. An argument broke out between Gloria and David, during which Gloria ordered Mariah to leave and never come back. According to Mariah, shortly after the argument, David lost control and physically attacked his mother, killing her on the spot. He later called Mariah back to help cover up what had happened. Together, they cleaned the crime scene, placed Gloria's body into her own car, and drove it out of the city to dispose of it. Mariah also admitted that the blood found in the garage was hers from a separate physical altercation with David that had occurred days earlier. She told police she was present at the burial site, standing just a short distance away. Her detailed testimony marked a major breakthrough in the investigation. On September 4th, 2009, David was formally arrested. He was charged with multiple offenses, including aggravated assault, concealment of a human corpse, and destruction of evidence. The trial took place in October 2010, during which Mariah, who had been granted immunity, testified against him. On the stand, she revealed that their relationship had started when she was just 14 years old, and David was already 29. But that wasn't the end of the shocking revelations. One of the most disturbing disclosures was that Mariah had a child with David, and that the baby was later given up for adoption. The courtroom was stunned, even among family members who already knew about their relationship. As the trial continued, investigators presented additional evidence. However, they did not find any traces of David's DNA on Gloria's body. The defense seized on this point, arguing that the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence and lacked direct physical proof. Throughout the proceedings, David remained composed, occasionally shedding tears, but firmly denied all allegations. The first trial ended without a unanimous verdict from the jury, leading to a mistrial and a venue change to San Antonio in hopes of ensuring impartiality. At the second trial in 2011, all eyes were once again on David when the court sentenced him to 54 years in prison. The same age Gloria was when she died, but even that wasn't the end of his legal troubles. 6 years later, in 2017, David faced 29 new charges in the state of Arizona, related to a series of assaults, kidnappings, and abuse that occurred between 2005 and 2006. To avoid a life sentence, he reached a plea deal with prosecutors, pleading guilty to 6 charges in exchange for dropping the rest. As a result, David received an additional 25 years behind bars, extending his incarceration significantly. Amid the mounting convictions and the growing list of horrific acts, Gloria's name came to symbolize the tragic unraveling of a family. She had lived with patience, sacrifice, and unconditional love, and yet, heartbreakingly, everything she had protected was destroyed by the very son she trusted the most. Her silent, cold death not only marked the end of her life, but exposed the dark side of a relationship that once seemed unbreakable. Story 3. The mansion featured the $8 million house, red and blue lights flashing through the darkness like harbingers of a tragedy waiting to be unveiled. From the outside, the mansion looked like the perfect symbol of the immigrant dream: money, power, and brilliant success. But behind those gilded walls, a family secret had been festering for years, and now it had exploded. To trace the chain of events leading to that fateful night, we need to start with the central figure of this tragedy, Gung Yuan. He was a self-made millionaire, born in 1973 in northeastern China. Gung Yuan wasn't born into wealth, but grew up in a family with some capital from the coal mining industry. With a sharp mind and clear ambition, he invested his family's savings to expand their business operations, and within just a few years, he transformed a small company into a multi-million-dollar empire. In 2005, when his wealth was sufficiently established, Gung Yuan decided to leave China and chose Canada as his next destination. He saw new opportunities there, favorable tax policies, a safe investment environment, and most importantly, a ticket to international expansion. But the path to legal residency in Canada wasn't as transparent as people might think. In late 2005, Gung Yuan married a Chinese-Canadian woman, a marriage that was later suspected to be fraudulent. The couple quickly divorced after less than 2 years. Through this brief marriage, Gung Yuan achieved what he wanted: the right to live legally on Canadian soil, with an estimated fortune of $50 million. Gung Yuan owned multiple expensive properties, including a private island, Bentleys and Rolls-Royces for his staff to use for shopping, and the $8 million mansion where he would meet his tragic end. But no matter how much money he had, he couldn't buy what he craved most. In stark contrast to Gung Yuan's spotlight was the shadow of Li Jiao, a 60-year-old man who always stood on the sidelines of other people's success stories. Li Jiao was born into an educated medical family, but his childhood quickly fell into darkness when political upheaval struck. At age 8, his father was labeled a counter-revolutionary element by the Chinese government and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. After serving his sentence, the man who had once been a doctor returned home, but was banned from practicing medicine and ostracized from society. Li Jiao's mother, though she continued working, was also isolated and scorned for marrying a traitor. The family fell into dire poverty. They lived day to day on a single meal, sharing one thin blanket during the freezing winter. Li Jiao, then just a boy, had to endure both hunger and the shame of being the son of a counter-revolutionary. Bullied by friends, isolated, and then heartbroken when his mother died in a traffic accident when he was 11. From then on, the family had no support. At 16, Li Jiao was forced to drop out of school to work as a laborer, working 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. Most of his income went to supporting his aging father. The pressure accumulated over many years, exhausting him both physically and mentally. One day, overcome with homesickness, he decided to walk 900 miles through snow to return home. When found in a state of exhaustion and delirium, he was admitted to a psychiatric ward and had to be treated with medication for an extended period. It wasn't until adulthood that Li Jiao's life began to show signs of change, opening a small photography shop with his brothers. He saved enough money to marry Xiao Mei, his gentle partner, and welcomed their first daughter Florence in 1987. 14 years later, in 2001, their family decided to immigrate to Canada, hoping to bring a better future for their only daughter. Florence, Li Jiao's only daughter, was the key piece in this tragedy. Born during China's one-child policy era, Florence was everything to her father. Li Jiao poured all his love, hope, and faith into his daughter, determined to give her a brighter future in Canada. As an adult, Florence quickly became in Vancouver's high society. She appeared on the reality show Ultra-Rich Asian Girls, under the stage name Flow.z, where viewers followed the lavish lives of 4 wealthy young Asian women. The show became a sensation not only in Canada, but also spread to China, making Florence a social media phenomenon, a symbol of the young, wealthy, free, and attractive generation. But behind the stage lights and golden lifestyle, Florence once confided something surprising to her friends. She never felt safe when alone with her uncle, Gung Yuan, during one filming session. She told producers directly that she always tried to avoid private contact with him, because Gung Yuan brought bad energy to the family, atmosphere that she couldn't explain. That vague unease, unexpectedly, was a painful prophecy because not long after, the brutal truth would be exposed. Everything began in 2010 when Gung Yuan invited Li Jiao's family to live together in the multi-million-dollar mansion with the promise of a mutually beneficial business arrangement. According to the plan, Li Jiao would become a partner managing Gung Yuan's farm investments, receiving 1/3 of the profits, while his wife Jiao Mei, Gung Yuan's cousin, would help with housework. For the Jiao couple, this was a golden opportunity to change their lives, to rise from their modest position in Canadian society. But the dream quickly became a nightmare. Throughout 5 years of living under the same roof, Li Jiao never received a single dollar in profit as promised. Gung Yuan not only didn't pay Li Jiao, but also the hired workers at the farm. This was because most of the money was being spent on supporting over 100 girlfriends, mistresses, and young beautiful sugar babies. In Li Jiao's eyes, the business arrangement had become just an excuse for Gung Yuan to turn him into an unpaid servant. He had to work extremely hard, wasn't respected, and was completely dependent. Worse than the exploitation was the humiliation. Li Jiao witnessed Gung Yuan daily bragging about having numerous illegitimate children, treating women terribly, even physically abusing and insulting lovers who didn't please him. Gung considered himself the center of the world, with no one worthy of more than him, especially those of lower status. For Li Jiao, who had lived a life of silence, endurance, and sacrifice, this wasn't just injustice, but the deepest insult to his self-respect. And so, drop by drop accumulated until the cup overflowed. A family that once thought they had entered paradise of prosperity, now only had suppression, anger, and feelings of betrayal. The fuse was ready, and it only needed a spark. Tragedy would explode. May 2nd, 2015. Began like any other day in the multi-million-dollar mansion in Vancouver's upscale neighborhood. The morning passed in familiar quiet. Xiao Mei and her mother went for their usual walk around the garden, leaving Li Jiao and Gung Yuan alone in the house. But for Li Jiao, that day wasn't ordinary. It was the day he decided to seize his last chance. He had carefully prepared to present a new business plan, something he hoped would open doors to the future, or at least be convincing enough for Gung Yuan to invest after 5 years of hopeless waiting. He didn't come as a servant, but as a man wanting to reclaim his dignity and position in the very house where he was living. But from the very first minutes, Gung Yuan shattered that hope. He sat indifferently, showing no interest in what Li Jiao was saying, constantly interrupting with contemptuous comments, and finally burst into laughter that made the atmosphere freeze. For Li Jiao, this was like a final slap. All the resentment buried over 5 years from exploitation, humiliation, and opportunity theft all showed on his face. He could no longer remain calm. For the first time, Li Jiao challenged the unfulfilled promises, demanding the justice he had never received. The entire luxurious room now felt like a pressure chamber just waiting to explode. And then, Gung Yuan made a proposal that would cost him his very life. Gung Yuan's proposal rang out in the room like a naked explosion, immoral, insane, and completely unimaginable. He suggested that if Li Jiao could arrange for him to marry Florence, he would be willing to give Jiao 50% shares in the new business venture. For a few seconds of eerie silence, Li Jiao thought he had misheard. This was an uncle talking about marrying his own niece, Florence, the only daughter Jiao loved like his entire life. Although legally, there was no blood relationship. Since Xiao Mei was Gung Yuan's adoptive cousin, for many years they had lived like a real family. Eating at the same table, living in the same house, calling each other uncle and niece. Florence was then a young woman who had just started a family, while Gung Yuan was over 40. Initially, Li Jiao thought this was just a sick joke, but the more he listened, the more chills ran down his spine because Gung Yuan was completely serious. He began rambling that he was ready to hire lawyers to deal with Florence's husband, that at his age he needed stability, that Florence could help him solidify his perfect media image. Zhao naturally objected outright. He said it would never happen, but Gung Yuan didn't stop. He smiled coldly, a smile that no longer hid his true nature, and responded with words that trampled on the self-respect of the man before him. "Who do you think you are to have the right to stop me? You're too weak." Gung Yuan's final words were like a slap directly to Li Jiao's self-respect. 5 years of silent endurance were now swept away by unforgivable insult. This man not only looked down on Zhao's efforts, but also schemed to turn his daughter into a bargaining chip. Florence was the final boundary he wouldn't let anyone cross. Rage exploded. No longer restrained, Zhao began cursing Gung Yuan with the most venomous words. In Chinese culture, he called Yuan worse than an animal, a heavy curse rarely uttered, but Yuan didn't back down. He charged forward and struck Zhao first. The situation immediately spiraled out of control. Gung Yuan, at 6 feet tall, was much stronger than the small Li Zhao, who was barely 5 feet tall. In panic, Zhao stumbled and ran until his eyes spotted a hammer near the bed. In desperation, Zhao grabbed it like a cornered animal. "Don't come closer," Zhao shouted, swinging the hammer toward Gung Yuan, but Yuan just sneered, advancing with contemptuous eyes and taunting. "You don't dare hit me. You're too cowardly." And then, as if all the suppression of his lifetime poured into one moment, Li Zhao swung the hammer, striking directly at Gung Yuan's leg. From there, everything became chaotic like a bloody action movie scene. The two men chased each other throughout the mansion, trying to wrestle the hammer from each other, the sound of breaking objects echoing loudly. Zhao said they fought all the way to the garage, where Gung Yuan collapsed, blood flowing from his wounds, but still not completely down. Yuan tried to stand up, his eyes full of murderous intent. Zhao feared he would get one of the guns hidden in the house. In a moment of absolute instinct, Zhao ran to the safe, pulled out a gun, and pointed it straight at Gung Yuan. "Don't come closer," he shouted, but Gung Yuan still didn't stop. He challenged, mocked, then recklessly lunged forward to grab the hammer. Gunshots rang out, 1 shot, then 2 shots. Gung Yuan fell down, never to rise again. However, when the investigation began, Li Zhao's testimony was quickly questioned. Investigators wondered, how could someone with a hammer blow to the leg still be able to chase around the entire mansion? Why didn't Zhao call the police instead of continuing this bloody struggle? When the gunshots rang out, Li Zhao's life entered a chapter of no return. Just minutes later, Zhao Mei and her mother returned from their morning walk. They entered the garage and immediately faced a horrifying scene. Gung Yuan lying motionless on the cement floor, blood spreading across the floor, while Li Zhao stood there, trembling, still holding the gun. Zhao Mei screamed, "What happened?" But Li Zhao didn't answer. He just breathed heavily, eyes vacant, then ordered, "You two need to leave here immediately, go as far as possible." That was the first turning point. Instead of calling police and presenting the incident as a desperate act of self-defense, Li Zhao chose to cover it up, and from that moment, every decision he made only dragged him deeper into darkness. After his wife and mother-in-law left, Li Zhao turned back to look at Gung Yuan's body, now living evidence of a crime that could result in a life sentence. In shock and chaos, he picked up the hammer again and gently poked Gung Yuan's body, not to torture, but to check, was there still any sign of life? Li Zhao wanted to be sure, but when he saw no more blood flowing, he knew there was no turning back. He began wiping blood stains with towels and brushes, trying to erase evidence from the scene. But the biggest problem remained unsolved: how to move the body of a man over 6 feet tall, weighing more than 200 pounds, out of the mansion without being discovered. As someone who had gone hunting, Li Zhao knew a dark truth. Something too big to move must be made smaller. Later, Li Zhao testified that he had processed bear, deer, and wild boar carcasses, large animals. He knew how to use knives to process animal carcasses, and in a state between consciousness and delirium, he began to act. "I kept thinking I was just butchering a bear," he later testified. "I told myself, it's not a person, just an animal." The 911 call, at 11:30 p.m. on May 2, 2015, marked the beginning of one of the most shocking family murder cases in Vancouver's history. The caller was Zhao Mei, Li Zhao's wife, speaking in Mandarin with a trembling, choked voice, revealing the horrific events she had witnessed through panicked sobs. Beside her, a man, apparently a family friend, was translating each word into English, so the emergency operator could understand the entire story. When asked why she waited 5 hours after discovering the incident to call police, Zhao Mei explained that she was completely panicked and didn't know what to do, so she sought advice from a close friend in the Chinese community before deciding to contact police. Upon receiving the information, Vancouver police immediately deployed multiple units to the 2688 Osler Street, located in the Shaughnessy neighborhood, the city's wealthiest area, where houses worth tens of millions of dollars are surrounded by high fences and tight security systems. Due to the sensitive nature of the area and the possibility that the suspect was still inside, police forces didn't rush in immediately, but chose to surround the entire house, then block access roads and establish a strict security perimeter. The mansion's modern design, with glass walls extending from floor to ceiling, inadvertently became a divine eye for police forces. From outside, They could clearly observe the entire interior space without needing to enter, and what they saw would become a lasting nightmare throughout many officers' careers. Li Jiao appeared in the dim light of the kitchen, holding a meat cleaver, sledgehammer, rifle, and even a chainsaw. The sound of metal clashing, the chainsaw's motor roaring intermittently, echoing through the night, made the scene eerie and terrifying. He moved constantly back and forth between the garage and kitchen, dragging bloody plastic bags, washing knives at the sink and dragging heavy buckets of water, as if doing familiar manual work. What made police shudder wasn't just the behavior, but the attitude. Between those extended work shifts, Li Jiao calmly sat down to make instant noodles, eating as if nothing had happened. All actions showed patience and calmness to the point of coldness, a composure only found in those who had crossed moral boundaries long ago. At that time, despite having sufficient evidence showing the horror happening inside, police still decided not to raid. They were concerned about the possibility of additional armed suspects or potential hostages held inside the mansion. Moreover, this was Vancouver's wealthiest neighborhood, where every police action was under media and political scrutiny. One mistake, however small, could create a fierce wave of criticism. The standoff lasted all night until Li Jiao finally answered the phone at 8 a.m. the next morning, exactly when he was leisurely eating instant noodles in the kitchen, beside an unwashed meat cleaver and a chainsaw still stained with blood. The arrest proceeded unusually easily. After talking with a Mandarin-speaking police officer over the phone, Li Jiao walked out of the mansion, unarmed, without resistance. He quietly raised his hands in surrender, his face gaunt and tired. As soon as he stepped outside, the tactical team immediately rushed in, subdued, and handcuffed him in silence. No cries of innocence, no resistance whatsoever. Only the cold acceptance of someone who knew it was all over. Police's first task was to sweep the entire house. They had to ensure no one else was threatened, no remaining hostages or other suspects. Every room, every hallway was thoroughly searched. And then, when they opened the garage door, the real nightmare began. Police entered one of the most gruesome crime scenes ever witnessed. Scattered throughout the garage were dozens of plastic bags containing body parts, with a total of 108 severed pieces, each in different conditions. Some were stuffed in freezers, others scattered on the cold concrete floor, still dripping blood. The cutting, sawing, and knife marks showed inconsistent dismemberment techniques, making forensic experts unable to immediately determine the motive or sequence of the dismemberment. Police immediately sealed the crime scene. A special investigation team and forensic experts were called in to work through the night. Each plastic bag was numbered, each body part carefully preserved for case reconstruction. What happened in this house was no longer an ordinary murder, but a shocking tragedy requiring both the legal system and forensic medicine to intervene. After being arrested, Li Jiao officially faced justice. A trial lasting nearly 2 years was opened, attracting media attention across Canada and China. At trial, defense attorneys presented an argument focusing on human factors rather than crime. They asserted that Li Jiao had no intention of killing Gung Yuan, that the incident resulted from an emotional explosion after years of oppression, insult, and especially after threats against his daughter, the only sacred thing left in his life. They called it an impulsive act of defense, not premeditated murder. Therefore, the defense requested the court reduce the charge from first-degree murder to manslaughter. This was a life or death difference. Manslaughter carries no minimum sentence, while premeditated murder could lead to life imprisonment. With this argument, they hoped the court would understand the circumstances and emotional desperation that drove Zhao to action, but the prosecution didn't accept that explanation. Legal representatives for Gung Yuan's family fiercely countered, arguing this wasn't simply a case of lost emotional control, but the consequence of long-simmering financial conflicts. They emphasized Zhao had been deceived by Yuan in business deals, denied wages, and treated like a lowly servant in the very house where he lived. According to them, had harbored resentment for years, and at some point he could no longer endure it. The prosecution accused Zhao of not only murder, but also carrying out a series of actions to cover up the crime, including dismemberment, identity fraud, and manipulating the victim's social media. Through each of these actions, they argued, Zhao had secretly planned the attack. This case quickly became an international media phenomenon, attracting attention from both China and Canada. A Chinese-Canadian millionaire murdered and dismembered in his own mansion. That setting was enough to captivate the public. But beyond the crime, The story contained every element that made public opinion unable to look away. Money, family disputes, cultural prejudices, and a controversial inheritance. However, international media, especially in Canada, seemed to sympathize more with Zhao. In numerous articles and analyses, Zhang Yuan's image wasn't portrayed as a simple victim, but as a controversial figure. He was described as someone with a lavish lifestyle, accustomed to spending money frivolously on hundreds of romantic relationships, with a list of girlfriends and sugar babies, so long it couldn't be verified. Many sources also suggested Zhang Yuan had been involved in shady financial dealings in China and had left his homeland to avoid investigation for corruption allegations. Zhang Yuan's $50 million estate immediately became the focus of a legal battle. Dozens of women appeared one by one, claiming to have children with him. After DNA testing conducted by Canadian courts, 5 children were confirmed as Zhang Yuan's biological offspring, and they were eligible to inherit according to law. Meanwhile, some people, especially in Vancouver's Chinese community, expressed sympathy for Li Jiao, seeing him as a father driven to desperation, acting out of fear that his daughter would be harmed. They didn't see him as a murderer, but as a victim of a toxic patriarchal system and an unbalanced power relationship. But on the other side, many people felt outraged by the case's brutality. The fact that Zhang Yuan was dismembered into 108 pieces, a number that shocked even experienced investigators, was seen as an action far beyond the bounds of justified self-defense. Many couldn't understand how a man could maintain the composure to process a body for so many hours. Until his arrest, Zhao had never had a criminal record, and in the eyes of those who knew him, he was always a quiet, kind, and gentle person. His life passed in silence, with no signs that he could be involved in such a horrific crime. And then, after nearly 5 years of tense litigation, a final verdict was announced in October 2020. The British Columbia Supreme Court concluded that Zhao was not guilty of first-degree murder as originally charged, but of manslaughter and unlawful interference with human remains. With this charge, he was sentenced to 10 years and 6 months in prison, with possible early release due to time already served in pretrial detention. The presiding judge declared that, although there were many questionable points in Zhao's testimony, especially inconsistent details about the conflict, the court didn't find sufficient evidence showing he had premeditated murder. More importantly, Zhao had shown genuine remorse throughout the trial process, and this greatly influenced the final verdict. However, the victim's family received the verdict with outrage. Zhang Yuan's representative lawyer couldn't hide his disappointment when responding to the press. Given the level of brutality and how the victim was killed and the body was handled, I think this verdict will surprise many people. Story 4. Around 5 a.m., a distress call led investigators to a cramped studio apartment where they discovered a body burned beyond recognition. At first, it appeared to be a case of self-defense and a moment of panic, but as new clues emerged, the incident quickly spiraled beyond a simple accident and pulled the investigation team into a vortex of suspicion, specifically in the early morning hours of June 29, 2013. South Korea's Emergency Dispatch Center received a call from a young woman, her voice trembling, reporting that someone was no longer breathing. First responders were immediately dispatched to an address in the Yensa district of Incheon. Upon arrival, they found the caller sitting motionless on the bed. As rescue personnel moved deeper into the apartment, the woman silently pointed toward the bathroom. There, they discovered a teenage boy lying unresponsive on the floor. Beside him was an adult man desperately attempting CPR. However, as the responders got closer, they were met with a shocking sight. The victim was completely naked, and his entire body was covered in severe burns. Despite emergency efforts to resuscitate him, the boy was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation didn't end there. A closer inspection of the body revealed even more disturbing details. The hair on the left side of his head, from the crown to the forehead, had been completely burned off. His facial skin was peeling off in large patches, exposing the raw dermal layer underneath. Large blisters covered his body, indicating he had been exposed to extreme heat prior to death. Meanwhile, the rescue team scanned the rest of the apartment and quickly noticed signs of foul play. Blood stains were scattered across the floor and surrounding furniture. Most notably, a golf club was found near the window, its shaft still smeared with dried blood, raising immediate doubts that this was merely an accident. Given these suspicious details, police quickly began questioning the 2 individuals present at the scene. The first was the apartment's tenant, and the one who had made the emergency call, a 29-year-old woman named Lee. The other was the deceased, 16-year-old Kwan, identified as a minor. Initial statements shocked the investigators. It turned out that Lee had previously been Kwan's private tutor. The two had been living together in the small apartment in Incheon. However, according to Lee, their arrangement was strictly academic. She claimed she kept Kwan close to monitor his studies and help improve his grades. In her follow-up testimony, Lee claimed the entire incident was an act of self-defense. According to her, Kwan had repeatedly made inappropriate sexual remarks and advances. The situation allegedly escalated around 1 a.m. on June 27th, 2 days before the fatal event when Kwan attempted to sexually assault her, forcing her to fight back in order to protect herself. Following up on her earlier statement, Ms. Lei admitted to pouring boiling water on Kwan and hitting him with a golf club in an act of self-defense. Shortly afterward, Kwan's condition rapidly deteriorated and he died. She also handed over a video to the police, claiming it captured the incident and would support her account. However, the footage did not show any sign of coercion from Kwan. On the contrary, Lee's behavior in the video raised suspicions among investigators that she might be trying to manipulate the narrative in her favor. That said, from a psychological standpoint, Lee's claims were not entirely implausible. Kwan, being a teenage boy, might have exhibited inappropriate or overly curious sexual behavior, especially considering his tutor was a young woman. On the other hand, a more critical detail emerged. At the time of his death, Kwan stood 5 feet 7.7 inches tall and weighed nearly 220 pounds. He had a solid, powerful build. Even if Kwan had posed a threat to Ms. Lee, subduing her would not likely have been difficult for someone of his size and strength. What further complicated the investigation was another disturbing inconsistency. A teenage boy living alone in a small apartment with his private tutor was, by any normal standard, deeply inappropriate. This unusual arrangement raised serious questions about the involvement and responsibility of Kwan's parents in monitoring the relationship. In response, Lee explained that Kwan had dropped out of school in December the previous year. He had been preparing for the GED-style equivalency exam for non-high school graduates, and she had promised to tutor him until the test date. That was why they had agreed to live together. As the investigation expanded, police reviewed Lee's phone records and discovered that she had been in frequent contact with a woman named Kim, a peer of the same age. They learned the two had graduated from the same teacher training college and remained close friends. Crucially, Ms. Kim also had a strong connection to the victim. In April 2012, both Lee and Kim had done a teaching internship at a middle school in Gangnam, where they first met Kwan. Kim was fully aware that Kwan had been living with Lee, so police summoned her for questioning. Recounting the night of the incident, Kim told investigators that around 1 a.m., Lee had called her in a panic, saying that Kwan had tried to rape her. Shocked and unsure how to respond, Kim sent her boyfriend on to the apartment in her place. On was the man later seen in the surveillance footage, performing CPR on Kwan in the bathroom. During police questioning, On stated that he had arrived at the apartment at Kim's request. When he got there, Kwan was already badly burned and unconscious. Not knowing what had happened before his arrival, On said he focused solely on first aid and immediately called emergency services. After hearing On's testimony, investigators brought Ms. Lee back in for another round of questioning to clarify inconsistencies in her story. However, she was largely uncooperative, dodging key questions by claiming she couldn't remember or choosing to remain silent. Her evasiveness significantly hampered the investigation. News of Kwan's death was quickly relayed to his family. Upon receiving the call, Kwan's parents were stunned, unable to believe what they were hearing. They broke down in tears and immediately traveled from Gangnam to Incheon. They had known that Kwan was staying in Incheon with Ms. Lee too, prepare for the General Educational Development GED test, and assumed she would arrange a separate room for him. Entrusting their 16-year-old sons, living arrangements and academic supervision to a non-family member was not an easy decision. However, Kwan's parents had reason to trust Ms. Lee. Back when Kwan was in 10th grade, he had met her during her student teaching internship at his school. From that point on, his grades improved significantly. Additionally, Ms. Lei had consistently tutored Kwan outside of regular school hours, helping with lessons and preparing him for exams. Her dedication reassured Kwan's parents and earned their full trust, especially during this crucial exam preparation period. However, things took an unexpected turn in October of that year, when Quan suddenly announced he wanted to quit school, claiming he was being bullied. Despite efforts from both his parents and homeroom teacher to persuade him otherwise, he stood firm. In reality, there was no bullying. Quan had simply wanted to dedicate all his time to preparing for the GED, as his academic performance had been steadily improving. Slee took a very proactive role in the matter. She personally visited Quan's family and promised she would help him pass the GED and continue to support him through college. She even offered to free of charge on the condition that he move in with her in Incheon, where she lived and worked, to ensure close supervision of his studies. At first, everything seemed fine. There were no signs of trouble. But about 4 months later, on June 27th, Ms. Lei suddenly called Quan's parents. In an angry voice, she accused Quan of trying to assault her, then abruptly hung up. Moments later, Quan called back, his voice filled with panic. He admitted to looking at his tutor as a woman and begged his father to help calm the situation. That would be the last time his family ever heard his voice. Ironically, Quan had never had romantic feelings for Ms. Lei. In fact, the person he actually liked was another student teacher, Ms. Kim, who had interned alongside Lee and was the same age. Quan was so fond of Ms. Kim that he once set her photo as his profile picture on his Messenger app as a subtle expression of affection. His parents were well aware of this. While investigators continued to untangle the complex web between these three individuals, the autopsy results were released. The official cause of death was respiratory failure due to severe burns, accompanied by acute encephalitis and multiple complications. At the time of his death, Quan's body had suffered extensive injuries across nearly all areas. Even more concerning, the forensic report noted that, in addition to the fresh injuries sustained during the incident, there were older signs of trauma. This led authorities to suspect that Quan may have been subjected to repeated abuse and prolonged neglect long before the fatal event. Not long after the forensic report was released, police uncovered another critical clue. The video provided by Ms. Lei had been recorded at 11 p.m. on June 26th. While her earlier statement claimed the alleged assault occurred around 1 a.m. the following day, when questioned about this contradiction, Ms. Lei eventually admitted that the rape allegation was entirely fabricated. Her admission paved the way for investigators to broaden their inquiry. Ms. Lei confessed to physically abusing Quan during the time they lived together. Even more disturbing, she justified her actions by claiming that she had worked hard to help him study, but Quan had fallen for someone else. According to her testimony, Quan was often distracted, and she resorted to violence as a way to discipline him. Throughout the investigation, she maintained that she alone was responsible for everything that happened. With her confession, the case was initially closed under the conclusion that Ms. Lei had acted out of jealousy and uncontrollable rage. However, when the case was forwarded to the prosecutor's office, things quickly took a more complicated turn. From the outset, prosecutors were skeptical of Ms. Lei's motives. Upon analyzing her phone data, including deleted texts and call logs, they found evidence suggesting there might be an accomplice still unaccounted for. Expanding the investigation, suspicions soon shifted toward Ms. Kim and her boyfriend An. Prosecutors seized their phones for forensic analysis, and just as investigators suspected, it was revealed that Quan and Ms. Kim had once been physically intimate. Extracted messages and data helped clarify the nature of Quan and Ms. Kim's relationship. During her teaching internship at Quan's middle school, he had been just 16 years old when he developed a crush on her. During that time, Ms. Lei had diligently helped Quan with his studies because he was in fact dating her friend Ms. Kim. From Ms. Kim's perspective, however, the relationship was never serious. To her, it was more of a fleeting emotional gain than a real connection. She never intended to commit to Quan and was likely drawn in by the novelty of the situation. When her internship ended and she returned to Incheon to prepare for the National Teacher Certification exam, she began feeling increasingly uneasy. She feared that Quan, still living in Gangnam and having had an intimate relationship with her, might expose everything. If the truth came out, her entire career as a teacher could be destroyed overnight. At the time, Ms. Kim had already started dating someone new, had become nothing more than an inconvenient burden she didn't know how to deal with. So she devised a way to cut ties by persuading Quan to drop out of school under the pretext of improving his grades, and sent him to a friendly and inch man, trusting every word that came from Ms. Kim. The woman he still believed was his girlfriend, Quan followed her instructions without hesitation. He dropped out of school and moved in with Ms. Lee. beginning an unusual cohabitation under the guise of intense academic tutoring. On the other side, from Ms. Lee's perspective, she suddenly found herself burdened with unexpected responsibility. Although she had taken Quan in at the request of a friend, sharing a cramped studio apartment with him quickly became a source of frustration. In order to get Quan to move out sooner, she felt compelled to help him pass the GED, reluctantly continuing to tutor him, even resorting to extreme disciplinary measures. Contrary to her expectations, Quan arrived in Incan emotionally withdrawn and unmotivated. What troubled him most was that his girlfriend Kim had suddenly stopped contacting him. She wouldn't call, wouldn't meet, wouldn't even reply. The growing sense of abandonment overwhelmed him, making it nearly impossible to focus on his studies. As a result, starting in May, just a few months before the GED exam in August, Quan's academic performance began to decline. This pushed Ms. Lee to intensify her punishments, both due to the pressure to help him pass and the resentment that her efforts were going to waste. Meanwhile, Ms. Kim was also pressuring Lee to be even more strict. Over time, the dynamic between the two women grew increasingly disturbing, as if they were competing to see who could punish Quan more severely. On one occasion, when Ms. Lee wondered aloud if she had hit him too hard, Ms. Kim laughed and recalled how she had once beaten him with a belt until he bled. More than what we had done. Their treatment of Quan escalated beyond reason. On June 25th, just 2 days before the fatal incident, text messages between Kim and her boyfriend, An, revealed that Quan had already been seriously abused. When Kim asked An to check on him, he replied that Quan had suffered severe burns from boiling water and couldn't be brought back home. He warned that if anyone found out, they'd both be arrested immediately, and it didn't stop there. The next day, at around 3 p.m., Quan was reportedly attacked again. The video Ms. Lee later gave to police was recorded at 11 p.m. on June 26th was complemented by a series of texts between her and Ms. Kim. In them, Lee claimed that while she was forcing Quan to memorize study material while standing, he suddenly asked if he could hug her. As she went in for the hug, he allegedly pulled her tighter. This unexpected gesture made Kim suspicious and sarcastic. Perhaps Quan, emotionally exhausted, had sought comfort from Ms. Lee, but Kim interpreted the situation differently, suggesting something inappropriate was going on between the two. She mocked the situation, saying they might as well become a couple, and told An to go over and see if anything intimate was happening. When An arrived, he pressed his ear to the door and reported that it didn't sound like sex, maybe just kissing. Still unsatisfied, Kim insisted he go inside and record evidence. Following her orders, barged into the room, filming as he assaulted Quan, deliberately staging the scene to make it look like a sexual assault had taken place. The situation didn't end there. Every move had been orchestrated in advance by Ms. Kim to help Ms. Lee fabricate a self-defense claim. When An began to tire and wanted to stop, Kim ordered him to continue, and instructed Lee to pour more boiling water on Quan to complete the narrative and make the self-defense claim look real in the eyes of the law. It's hard to comprehend how someone as physically strong as Quan, who weighed nearly 220 pounds, didn't fight back during such prolonged and brutal abuse. But upon closer examination, the answer lies in emotional manipulation. Ms. Kim exploited the feelings Quan had for her, using them to control his mind. She made him believe that if he endured enough humiliation and pain, he might one day earn her forgiveness, or even her love. That's why, even during moments when Quan felt lonely and considered returning home, Ms. Kim never encouraged him to calm down or reconnect with his family. Instead, she subtly planted the idea in his head: if you truly love me, pass the GED exam, then we can live together and inch on. The more Quan believed in that imagined future, the deeper he sank into dependency. Despite facing both emotional and physical distress, he kept everything from his parents. Whenever they offered to visit, he made excuses to avoid them, convinced that just a little more effort would make everything better. Trusting Kim completely, he allowed her to manage the rent and all living expenses sent by his family. This gave her total control over his life. Quan's willingness to suffer for the woman he loved could, to some extent, be understood. But what truly puzzled many was how Ms. Lee, Kim's longtime friend, so obediently followed every irrational command, never once standing up for herself or questioning the situation. To understand this, we must go back to their high school days. That's when the twisted foundation of their relationship began. Lee and Kim attended the same school, but were complete opposites. Kim was beautiful, wealthy, and always the center of attention, while Lee was quiet and introverted, often overshadowed by her more glamorous friend. That long-standing sense of inferiority seemed to create a mixture of admiration and envy within Lee. Over time, she began to mimic Kim's choices. When Kim decided to study education and become a teacher, Lee followed. Even though she had never shown any real passion for teaching, this dependent personality revealed itself even more in her personal life. In 2009, was introduced to a man named Kwon through Kim from the beginning. Lee followed the advice of both Kim and her boyfriend almost religiously. When Kwon expressed that he preferred Korea women, Lee went so far as to gain nearly 22 pounds just to match his ideal type. Later, this same susceptibility was exposed again. One day, Kwon messaged Lee, saying that if Kwon didn't pass the GED, his mother might be in danger due to a connection with the Yakuza. To any rational person, the claim would sound absurd. But Lee believed it completely. She panicked and became consumed with fear. As a result, she pressured Kwon relentlessly, convinced that his passing the exam was the only way to save her boyfriend's mother. The dysfunction of the entire relationship became even clearer with one disturbing revelation. In 4 years of dating, Lee had never once met Kwon in person. She believed he lived abroad and couldn't return to Korea, so she waited patiently in hope. But the truth was far more sinister. Kwon never existed. He was a fictional persona created by Ms. Kim, carefully constructed to manipulate her best friend from the shadows. The shock didn't end there. When police revealed that Kwon was a fictional character fabricated by Ms. Kim to manipulate her best friend, Ms. Lee completely broke down. She panicked, shaking her head in disbelief, unable to accept what she had just been told. Before she could even begin to regain her composure, another name surfaced on Kim's real boyfriend, who had been deliberately kept out of the story until that moment. Following these revelations, the case quickly moved to trial. At the initial hearing in December 2013, Ms. Lee was sentenced to 7 years in prison for inflicting bodily harm resulting in death. Ms. Kim received a 2-year sentence for assault and abuse. Kim's boyfriend was sentenced to 8 months in prison for the same charges. Importantly, the court did not classify the case as murder, but rather as bodily injury leading to death. This meant that the defendants were not judged to have had intent to kill, but rather to have caused physical harm that unintentionally resulted in fatal consequences. Furthermore, the court viewed Kim as the manipulative mastermind, and as someone who acted under her influence. Still, convicting them as accomplices proved difficult due to insufficient evidence directly linking the burns to Kwon's cause of death. Ms. herself also complicated the prosecution's efforts. She willingly admitted that pouring the boiling water had been her own decision, never claiming she had been instructed or coerced. This demonstrated that she still hadn't fully realized she had been skillfully and deliberately manipulated from beginning to end. The case proceeded to appeal. In September 2014, the Supreme Court upheld the original verdicts. When the final sentences were read aloud, Kwon's parents broke down in tears, devastated and unable to accept that those responsible for their son's death received what they considered to be shockingly light punishments. Just a few years earlier, another tragedy had already left a deep scar on the minds of South Koreans. On April 30th, 2012, near the Baramsan Children's Park in Cheongsam, close to Sinchon Station in Seoul, a sanitation worker stumbled across a young man who was bleeding profusely. Upon approaching, the worker realized the man was already dead. The victim, believed to be in his early 20s, had been dumped in a patch of grass. His body was covered in wounds and blood, as though he had endured a savage beating. Part of his internal organs had spilled out from his abdominal cavity, a sight so gruesome it left even seasoned investigators shaken. Due to the severe condition of the body, police launched an immediate investigation. Using missing persons reports from friends, they quickly identified the victim as a 20-year-old man with the last name Kim. On the day of the murder, he had been out with friends, but around 7 p.m., he mentioned he had an appointment and left alone for SI. Footage captured the last known image of Kim walking with this group toward the stairs leading to the subway station. Given these facts, when the mutilated body was discovered, investigators immediately focused their suspicions on the 3 teenagers. The crime scene suggested a murder driven by hatred. And based on verified accounts, Yoon Lee and Hong were the last known people to be with Kim, making them prime suspects. To understand the dynamics behind these relationships, we have to start with Park, Kim's girlfriend, who was the same age as him. They met on a gaming website in March 2011, and officially began dating in early 2012. During their relationship, Park frequently visited an internet cafe called Commander Cafe, where she was an active participant in its community events. It was there that Park became increasingly involved with a unique group of people who created fictional characters and role-played as personas of their own imagination. Commander Cafe encouraged its members not to interact under their real identities, but to speak and behave as minor characters they had invented. Through this connection, Park introduced the space to those around her, including Kim. The cafe didn't just host role-playing events, it also attracted enthusiasts of occult themes. With characters often based on spirits, witches, or sorcerers wanting to support his girlfriend's interests. Kim joined Commander Cafe and began participating in the roleplay activities. However, his initial curiosity soon turned into discomfort. Kim became increasingly uneasy as Park grew more and more absorbed in the fantasy world. Although he tried to be supportive, he struggled with how invested she had become. Within the cafe's imaginary universe, Park portrayed a powerful witch, a figure of high status in a world dominated by dark forces. Park's influence extended beyond her relationship with Kim. She recruited others as well, including Lee, a student she had once tutored, and Lee's girlfriend Hong. Over time, all three became prominent members of the cafe community. Since Commander Cafe catered to such niche interests, the shared experiences drew them closer together. As Park's personality began to shift, Kim's concerns deepened. He wasn't just bothered by her obsession with the cafe or her dark magical persona. He also noticed she was becoming increasingly aggressive and controlling. Empowered by the following she had built inside Commander Cafe, Park started acting arrogantly, often dictating how others should behave. This was especially evident in how she treated anyone who disagreed with her. In reality, whenever she encountered dissent, she would rally her supporters to verbally attack others online, often using crude, abusive language. Seeing this side of her, cautiously suggested that she step away from the cafe. Park's reaction was explosive. She lashed out at Kim, accusing him of being controlling. Their disagreements escalated into intense arguments, eventually leading to their breakup. According to those who knew Park, she had always been someone who resented any intrusion into her personal life. From that point on, Park began spreading rumors about Kim to those around her, including Lee and her girlfriend, Hong, who were still actively involved in the cafe community. After being exposed to Park's negative claims over and over again, both Lee and Hong gradually came to believe that Kim was an untrustworthy and toxic person. Tensions escalated when Kim found out about what was being said and messaged Lee, asking her directly why she was staying silent. But instead of responding, Lee ignored him. Around the same time, Park, Lee, and Hong solidified their alliance, and began viewing Kim as a dangerous presence who needed to be cut off. Things took a darker turn on April 24, 2012, when Park published a blog post explicitly expressing her desire for Kim to disappear from her life. Lee commented on the post, appearing to support the sentiment. A few days later, Lee posted cryptic messages on social media, hinting that someone was going to take care of it, implying that Kim would be dealt with. What happened next brought the situation to a breaking point. On April 30th, the day of the murder, Kim reached out to Park, Lee, and Hong, requesting to meet in person. He wanted to apologize for any past outbursts and officially end what he called a toxic relationship. The meet was quickly arranged. Shortly after, Lee contacted someone to help carry out a plan to kill Kim. The person she reached out to was Yoon, a friend of Hong's whom she had met through online gaming. Yoon had never met Park before and had no connection to Kim. To this day, it remains unclear why Yoon agreed to participate in the plan. Regardless, Lee assigned him a specific role. Yoon, who had a large and imposing build, was to approach Kim first and physically restrain him, giving Lee the opportunity to strike. Lee's role was to stab Kim directly. She also asked Yoon to bring the weapons, including a combat knife and a butterfly knife. The plan was set in motion early that morning. Around 10 hours before the murder, Lee and Yoon arrived at the designated meeting point. At 7 p.m., Kim said goodbye to his friends and told them he had an appointment. He headed towards Sinchon. While on the way, he messaged the group chat, saying he was meeting Park and some people from Commander Cafe. At around 7:30 p.m., near the Sinchon food alley, Kim met with Lee, Yoon, and Hong. The group then walked together toward Baramson Children's Park. There, Yoon, Lee, and Hong lured Kim into a remote area of the park near Sinchon Station, a place known to be quiet and deserted at night. At 8:13 p.m., Kim sent his final message in the group chat, saying he was walking into a sketchy-looking alley. After that, there were no more messages. By 10 p.m., his friends began to worry, realizing that Kim had gone to meet people from Commander Cafe, but had since vanished without a trace. Once they arrived at the park, everything went exactly as Lee and Yoon had planned. The three Yoon, Lee and Kim walked up a stairway at the park, while Hong said she would wait at the bottom. When only the three of them remained, Kim and Lee started arguing. In reality, the argument was staged to serve as a distraction and give Lee and Yoon the opening they needed to carry out the killing. At the exact moment Kim bent down to retrieve something from his bag, Yoon rushed in from behind and used both arms to strangle him. The ambush was so sudden that Kim had no time to fight back. Immediately after, Lee stepped in and stabbed Kim 10 times without hesitation, killing him on the spot. With little time to think, and Lee dragged Kim's body into a nearby bush, hoping to conceal it. However, the vegetation was too sparse to hide the body properly. Blood had soaked into the ground, making the scene easily noticeable. In a panic, the two abandoned the body and quickly fled the park. Their following actions only reinforced how careless and short-sighted the group had been. When luring Kim from Seonchun to the children's park, they completely ignored the presence of security cameras, which captured clear footage of all three suspects. Even worse, the crime took place in view of several passers-by. From a psychological perspective, experts later concluded that Lee, Hong, and Yoon were all suffering from severe internet addiction, which deeply impaired their judgment and decision-making abilities. Lee's personal history revealed deep emotional trauma. He had attempted suicide 3 times. During one of these crises, he met Park, who introduced him to Commander CAF. For Lee, it became a refuge from reality, a place he participated in actively and passionately. His girlfriend, Hong, also took part in the group's activities. Unlike Lee and Hong, Yoon had no prior connection to Commander CAF and had never met Park. However, he often posted online about being ready to take on difficult challenges, almost as if he were waiting for one to appear. So when Lee reached out and invited him to be part of the murder plan, Yoon accepted without hesitation. The person who held the most influence over Lee and Hong was none other than Park. To them, Commander CAF was more than just an online community. It was tied to their inner spiritual world. In that environment, Park stood out as a leader. Her presence dominated, and over time, both Lee and Hong became increasingly dependent on her guidance. Following her words without question, with that level of influence, Park easily shaped the opinions of her followers. Despite her frequent use of harsh and offensive language, she maintained strong support. Anyone Park disliked was instantly alienated by the group. In their eyes was someone trying to push Park out of Commander CAF, and therefore needed to be eliminated. Park had once said she wanted Kim to disappear, which only fueled the hatred. She even posted messages inciting violence, and Lee responded eagerly. Despite knowing that Lee was preparing to act, Park never stepped in to stop him. In fact, just before the murder, had been with Yoon Lee and Hong. She saw them carrying weapons, but said nothing. Rather than intervene, she chose to stay behind, presumably to maintain plausible deniability in case things went wrong. As a result, the crime scene revealed the body poorly hidden under a few thin branches, along with surveillance footage and multiple pieces of physical evidence left behind. These were more than enough to identify and charge the perpetrators. Yoon and Lee were arrested less than 24 hours after the murder. At the time of his arrest, Lee was casually spending time with his girlfriend Hong at a public bathhouse. Shortly afterward, as the entire case was made public, was identified as the mastermind behind the plan, while Hong acted as the lookout. Both were arrested and charged with aiding and abetting murder. In court, Park repeatedly defended herself, claiming she had only spoken out of anger, and never imagined her words would lead to an actual homicide. She insisted she was completely innocent. After a thorough trial and careful consideration of all testimonies and evidence, the court issued its final ruling. Park was sentenced to 12 years in prison for her role in orchestrating the crime, even though she didn't carry out the murder herself. However, her sentence was later reduced to 7 years on appeal. The two main perpetrators, Yoon and Lee, each received 20-year prison sentences. Hong was also sentenced to 7 years as an accomplice. This case was not only about physical violence. It was a tragic story of psychological manipulation, toxic dependency, and fantasies nurtured by the online world. A single, seemingly casual comment was enough to push someone toward death. And sometimes it's not the hand that wields the weapon, but the voice behind the scenes that sets the tragedy in motion. Story 5. Yeah, well, we don't murder poor people. What happens when the systems you trust let a violent criminal roam freely? And what happens when you invite this criminal into your home, near your children? In today's case, we'll look at how the monster known as Damien Bendel was created, emboldened, and let loose due to the incompetence of the authorities we trust to keep us safe. This is a story of a ticking time bomb, who ultimately took the lives of 4 innocent souls in the most inhumane way possible. As we uncover the details of this case, you will be shocked to see just how preventable it all could have been. Let's get started. Damien Bendel was born on the 6th of January, 1990, in Swindon, a town in Wiltshire, England. Right from the get-go, Bendel's family life was chaotic. He grew up regularly witnessing fighting, drug use, and people breaking the law. Instead of being ashamed of this, Bendel actually felt proud. He would brag to his peers about how many times his family members had been in jail. According to his own account, he started selling drugs at the age of 9. A source from his hometown said Bendel's criminal acts were all part of a stated intention to emulate a bad boy relative he looked up to. The source claimed he always wanted to be like his relative, but always fell short because the relative was far worse. He was open about it, and would say he wanted to be a bad boy. A neighbor who also knew him growing up described Bendel as a fancist who boasted of hanging around with gangsters in South London. As Bendel got older, he started causing trouble in his neighborhood. In 2004, at age 13, he was reprimanded for criminal damage after throwing an egg at a woman's house. From there, he would try to escalate his violence to a sickening level. Bendel was known for hurting animals. Locals said he especially took pleasure in torturing kittens. Research has consistently reported childhood cruelty to animals as the first warning sign of later delinquency, violence, and criminal behavior. In fact, nearly all violent crime perpetrators have a history of animal cruelty in their profiles. It's definitely a red flag to look out for. Not only that, but Bendel would viciously attack the racial minorities in his community. He claimed he was a high-ranking member of a white supremacist group called the Aryan Brotherhood. According to him, he had carried out several hate crimes for which he was never convicted. He reported having 2 Nazi-inspired tattoos as well. But the issue here is that there is no evidence he has ever been a part of this group. His probation officers would even go on to mention that he had a habit of telling people grandiose stories about himself. This habitual pathological lying is another major red flag from Bendel's early life. Another big problem in Bendel's life was drugs. He started using cocaine and heroin when he was a teenager, which gave him the push to start committing crimes for the money to afford his habit. On April 20th, 2010, the police found cocaine on him and gave him a warning. But this didn't stop him. Just a few weeks later, on June 3rd, 2010, Bendel attacked an Asian man who was walking alone on the street. When the man tried to defend himself, Bendel mercilessly beat him up and stole his things. According to a report, this beating had left the man unconscious. The level of force he used was described as excessive and beyond what was needed to simply rob him. Bendel was just enjoying being extremely violent. The victim remembered Bendel saying racist things while hitting him over and over again before he passed out. Bendel was arrested, and on June 30th, 2011, he was sent to prison for 3 years. Unsurprisingly, this wouldn't be the last time Bendel ends up behind bars. After getting out of prison in August 2012, Bendel seemed to stay out of trouble with the police for a while. But this doesn't mean he had changed for good. We now know that during this time, he had started abusing a woman. During their time together, she was too afraid to tell anyone about what she was suffering, because she thought Bendel might kill her if he found out. But he couldn't stay out of trouble for long. On June 7, 2015, he went into a news shop in Swindon run by a 62-year-old man named Narendra Patel. Narendra remembered Bendel acting strange, walking back and forth in the shop and looking out the window a lot. Bendel made some phone calls and bought some cold drinks. Suddenly, he flashed a 6-inch knife at the counter and demanded the victim give him money and cigarettes. Fortunately, Narendra had a golf club behind the counter for protection, and he tried to hit Bendel with it. But Bendel ducked and then ran away. The police started looking for Bendel, but he turned himself in before they could catch him. On August 21, 2015, he was sent to prison again for 3 more years. While in prison, Bendel's violent behavior got even worse. In early 2016, his request to move to a different prison was rejected. This made him so angry that for months he planned how to get back at the prison staff. On May 10, 2016, he attacked a prison officer so badly that he was knocked out and had to have surgery. Two other officers who tried to help were also hurt by Bendel's uncontrollable fury. While he was in prison, his ex-partner told the probation service about how dangerous he was. She made a request for him to be prevented from contacting her and asked to know his release date and whether she could obtain a restraining order. 2 days after this, her new partner also contacted probation services and said that more should be done to protect her. The victim was terrorized by the thought that he would come after her when he got out. Bendel was let out of prison on October 31, 2018, but he behaved poorly and didn't follow the terms of his release. He drank alcohol on the approved premises where he was staying, missed curfew, and didn't do what he was told. So, on November 28, 2018, he was sent back to prison. He stayed there until August 9, 2019, when he was released again without probation supervision. During this time, he hinted to his probation officer that he met a woman he wanted to live with at the end of his sentence. The worst was yet to come. After Bendel got out of prison again, his deviance only grew worse. He grew a sexual interest in children. In May 2020, the police in Wiltshire were told that Bendel was trying to get close to a 16-year-old girl, was in foster care. The police wanted to warn him to keep away from the teenager, but he had escaped by then. He had allegedly moved on, trying to start sexual relationships with even younger girls who were in similar situations. The police feared Bendel could start abusing them, so he was classified as high risk. The police told the probation service about this, but later on, this information wasn't used when it should have been. This gross negligence from the probation service was widely condemned later. For now, this shows how dangerous people like Bendel can be. A lifetime of guiltlessly lying makes them experts at manipulation. With women, Bendel would draw them in by making them feel special, but later show how terrifying he really was. By then, it was often too late, as the women were under his control and too scared to leave. This is how Bendel started a relationship with Terry Harris, a 35-year-old single mother of two. They met on a dating website in March 2020. Terry had just broken up with her partner of 14 years, Jason Bennett. Jason was the father of Terry's two children, Lacey, who was 11 years old, and John Paul, 13 years old. Terry really liked Bendel, and after only a few months, they started living together in a house in Kilmarsh, a village near Sheffield. But, as psychopaths often do, Bendel had two ulterior motives for moving in with Terry. First, he could be closer to her and control her more easily. Second, he could avoid the police because they were looking for him. This was because a few months after they met, he set fire to a car he was trying to steal in Swindon while drunk and high on cannabis. Terry, who was unaware of this, really liked Bendel, but her friends and family were worried. Bendel liked to brag about his criminal past and that he was running from the police. A friend of Terry described how Bendel was acting erratically and appeared pumped up as if he was looking for trouble. Bendel smoked a lot of cannabis, and according to those who knew him, he had two different personalities depending on whether he had taken drugs. He would brag about fighting with people and talked about how he was a boxer and boasted about the times he had been in jail. In July 2020, Bendel told Terry's mother about a friend's dog who hadn't been well. His friend couldn't afford to take it to the vet, so he had taken a brick and killed the dog by hitting it around the head. When Bendel walked out, Terry had showed her mother his knuckle duster. He also leeched off Terry, as he had no interest in working, and spent what little money he had on alcohol and drugs. Terry's mother, Angie Smith, thought Bendel was controlling her daughter. She saw that Terry always seemed nervous around Bendel, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Angie said she's always been a tomboy, but when she started going with him, it was always tight shorts and low-cut tops. Her hair became bright red. It was as if he was parading her around. Bendel was also stopping Terry from seeing her mom and friends. Angie begged Terry to leave Bendel, but she was in love with him. Terry got pregnant early in the relationship and was very happy about it, but the idea of becoming a father didn't make Bendel's behavior any better. Instead, his behavior grew worse and more abusive. He became very jealous and baselessly accused Terry of cheating on him constantly. Bendel was so irrationally angry that even neighbors could hear his shouting and abuse. Unable to take this awful treatment any longer, Terry began her first steps to get away from Bendel. That's when the situation reached its worst point. In May 2021, the police finally caught up with Bendel. They arrested him for the arson he had committed the year before, and he was taken to court. On the 9th of June, 2021, Bendel was given a suspended prison sentence and a curfew. This meant he didn't have to go to prison right away, but he had to follow certain rules. Shockingly, this abusive man was allowed to go back and live with Terry and her children. Just 3 months later, one of the most horrific crimes in Britain took place. This was a deeply concerning and appalling case. We found that at every stage of Damien Bendel's supervision by the probation service, from his initial court report to his supervision in the community, the quality of that work was wholly inadequate and far below what was required and what the public have every right to expect, I think. We found both failings amongst individual practice by probation staff and by their line managers. They reflected a broader issue in the probation service, that they are struggling to properly assess and manage the risks of harm that people on probation may present to the public and to children and to potential partners. Late in the evening of September 18, 2021, Bendel was in the house with Terry and her 2 children, John Paul and Lacey. The children were getting ready for bed. Sadly, there was another child there too, Lacey's best friend, 11-year-old Connie Gent, who had come.